Shopping for clothing through the years has been dominated by department stores and their brick-and-mortar locations, where we would spend many hours perusing. Many of these stores became trusted companies that we would revisit over and over, but then suddenly, most of them began to disappear. So let's take a look back at our favorite department stores that are now defunct. Thank you to MyHeritage for partnering with me on this video. Montgomery Ward was an institution for over a century. Started in 1872 by Aaron Montgomery Ward in Chicago, the business began as a mail-order catalog that offered thousands of items. The catalog rivaled Sears, and they would both fight for market dominance over the next few decades. During the late 1920s, Montgomery Wards began to open retail outlets, and they began popping up quickly. Within 4 years, they had over 500 stores. Montgomery Ward was one of the giant retailers of the 20th century, but they struggled to maintain their size. Through the years, they were bought, merged with, and sold. At one point during the 1970s, you could find stores called Jefferson Ward. This came from a merger with a chain of stores out of Miami. You may also remember Electric Avenue, which was their attempt to specialize in electronics. By 1985, Montgomery Ward had closed their catalog business, and by June of 2001, all of the remaining retail locations were also closed. If you're watching this video, there's a good chance you cherish old memories. What better way to discover where you came from than by building your family tree? MyHeritage can help you do that. Finding family members is easy, and within minutes your family tree starts to take shape. Smart Match does most of the work for you, identifying and matching relatives. Plus, Instant Discoveries can add entire branches to your family tree with the click of a button. For me, it was fascinating to track my family from northern Mississippi to Alabama, where my fifth grandfather back was a member of the Alabama House of Representatives. And then I traced them back to the 1700s, as they made their journey from Ireland to the mountains of Virginia. And then comes the best part, pulling out the old photo albums and uploading special photos. MyHeritage makes it really easy to bring your family members to life with technology that lets you colorize photos and even animate them, which was really amazing. With over 19 billion historical documents on MyHeritage, finding family members has never been easier. You can also invite others to join you on your journey, which is what I did. And I discovered so many new things I never knew about my family. So now it's your turn. Scan this QR code or click the link in the description to get started with a 14-day free trial. MyHeritage. Discover your family history today. Another giant in Chicago shopping was Marshall Field's. Following the Great Fire in 1871, Marshall Field & Company was established. They became the premier store in Chicago with their large flagship store located on State Street. Through the first half of the 20th century, they had steady growth. They had revenue totaling $225 million by 1951, and by the 1960s and 70s, they began to push their way into the suburban shopping malls that were becoming popular. But Fields began to lose their regal feeling that set them apart from other department stores. Through the 1980s and 1990s, they bounced from the British American Tobacco Company to the Dayton-Hudson Corporation, and then finally settled with the parent company of Macy's in 2005. For many, Marshall Field's was best known for their Christmas traditions at the historic Chicago store. The decorated windows that lined the building and a stop at the Walnut Room were all you needed to get into the spirit. Unfortunately, in 2006, the remaining Marshall Field stores, including their flagship store, were rebranded as Macy's. Kmart was a new concept developed by the five-and-dime chain Kresge's to be a large discount department store. The very first Kmart opened in Garden City, Michigan in 1962, 6 months before Walmart opened their first store. The next few decades saw large discount stores explode, and Kmart reaped the benefits. In 1977, Kresge officially changed their name to Kmart, and by 1981 they had over 2,000 stores located coast to coast. Famous for their Blue Light Special promotion, Kmart became a retail giant with sales peaking in 1992. The following years saw competition increase and sales decrease, but Kmart still had successful brand deals with the likes of Martha Stewart, Jacqueline Smith, and Kathy Ireland. Sales, however, were falling and stores were closing, and a bankruptcy in 2002 led to the merger with Sears. The two struggling companies propped each other up for the next decade before a second bankruptcy filing. As of today, there are still a handful of stores remaining, but for most of us, Kmart is a fading memory. Opened in 1960, Service Merchandise was the brainchild of Harry and Mary Zimmerman of Nashville, Tennessee. Their experience with five and dime stores, and later wholesaling, led them to create a catalog showroom. The store had a range of products from jewelry and housewares to sporting goods and clothing. Customers could shop and pick out an item, and an associate would retrieve it for them from the back of the store. The process was later computerized, and products would be delivered on a conveyor belt from the stockroom. Service Merchandise was the leading catalog showroom during the 1980s, and they also were big sponsors of game shows like Wheel of Fortune and The Price is Right. At its peak, they were located in 37 states and did over $4 billion in sales. Their profits began to slip with the rise of Walmart, Bed Bath & Beyond, and Best Buy. The company began to discontinue unsuccessful product lines, stores were converted to a more traditional shopping experience, and the catalog side of the business was abandoned altogether. By 2002, Service Merchandise was no more. After filing for bankruptcy and liquidating all of their assets, the store officially closed their doors. Calor was a Northeast department store that was started by Carl and Dorothy Bennett in 1951. The name was a mashup of their first names, and the first location opened in a small second-floor location in Port Chester, New York. They sold toys, housewares, luggage, and gifts from name-brand suppliers. The company slowly grew, expanding to 4 locations by 1961, and by the end of the 1970s they were up to 56 stores. Carl and Dorothy took small steps and grew their business, despite a recession during the 1970s. Calor was different. They offered high-quality goods and backed it up with a generous return policy. This made them very attractive to other companies. So in 1981, they were purchased for $313 million by Associated Dry Goods. Carl stayed on with the company until his retirement in 1985, and everyone felt like he was the reason they were so successful. Immediately, things got shaky. Sales at Calor were slipping, and by the 1990s, Calor was filing for bankruptcy. 1999 was their final year in business, ending a 48-year run. Sears, the largest retailer in the United States during the 1980s, began in Chicago in 1892. The company started as a catalog company that offered everything a farm household could ever want. This focus on rural America drove Sears and Roebuck's growth and propelled them into a brick-and-mortar store by 1925. It was in the early 1930s that they released their famed Christmas wish book, which became a staple in almost every household, as kids would circle in dog-ear pages and dream about Christmas morning. Not only was the company busy opening hundreds of locations, but they also diversified by buying other businesses, and they also started Allstate Insurance and the Discover credit card during the 1980s. Just like many of the companies mentioned here, Sears declined dramatically during the 1990s. Poor management and pressures from discount retailers made profits fall. When Kmart bought Sears in 2004, both companies were trying to get back to being profitable, but their efforts just led to more stores closing and many of their brands being sold to competitors. The once great American company has been reduced to just a few stores, and although they are not completely gone, time is running out. Mervyn Morris first opened his namesake store, Mervyn's, in 1949 near Oakland, California, and it grew across the Bay Area, and soon it could be found along the entire West Coast. Mervyn's sold clothing, bedding, furniture, jewelry, and housewares, among other things, and they were often found at shopping malls. By 1977, Mervyn's had 42 stores, and the next year, the Dayton Hudson Company, also known as Target, purchased the company. The 1980s and 1990s saw Mervyn's moving into other states, but as they grew, so did their sister company Target. They were competing for the same customer, so by 2004, Target was looking to sell Mervyn's. Immediately after selling the company to an investment firm, stores began to close. Within 2 years, half of their stores had closed, and everything else was being liquidated as bankruptcy loomed. In 2009, during the midst of the housing recession, there was no chance for the company to recover, and remaining stores closed that year. J.L. Hudson founded Hudson's Department Store in Detroit, Michigan in 1881. What began as a store on the ground floor of the Detroit Opera House grew to be the tallest department store in the world. Following the building of the new flagship store on Woodward Avenue, Hudson, along with his nephews, grew the business to become the place to go in Detroit. The store was enormous, and it was the epicenter of much of what went on downtown. During the 1950s, Hudson looked to open new locations in newly developed shopping malls around the region. By the 1960s, the Dayton Company out of Minneapolis bought Hudson's, and together they became the Dayton-Hudson Company. It wasn't long after that Detroit began to suffer economic hardships, and Hudson's started to decline too. By 1983, their downtown store had closed and would later be imploded to make way for new development. It wasn't until 2001 that the remaining Hudson stores closed for good, as they were rebranded to Marshall Field's and later to Macy's. If you've stuck around this long, don't worry, there's still more. But I wanted to let you know that we have some retro merchandise available too. Just click the link in the description to head on over to the store. For nearly 150 years, Gimbles was a leading American department store. Adam Gimble opened his first store in 1842 in Indiana, but later moved the company's operations to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. From there, Gimbles became a national chain, opening its second store in Philadelphia in 1894, and a Manhattan flagship store surrounding Herald Square in 1910. They are well known for hosting the oldest Thanksgiving Day Parade, which started in Philadelphia in 1920. And they also came to be the primary rival of Macy's. Over the years, Gimbles was featured in numerous films, including Miracle on 34th Street, and it was even frequently referenced as a shopping destination for Lucy Ricardo and Ethel Mertz on the 1950s television series I Love Lucy. Gimbles became a liability for its future owners, the British American Tobacco Company, with marginal profits, and the chain that once boasted 53 locations closed for good in 1987. Ann and Hope was a chain of big box stores in the Northeast that pioneered the idea of discount superstores. Founded in Rhode Island in 1953 by Martin Chase, Ann and Hope began as a clothing store that began renting space to other retailers within their store. This practice led to a diverse store with many departments, including a garden center. Walmart's Sam Walton was inspired by what he saw at Ann and Hope, and incorporated many of the same features within his own stores. As the retail landscape changed during the 1980s, Ann and Hope began scaling back and laying off staff. Many locations closed, and others were converted into outlet stores. By 2001, all Ann and Hope department stores were closed, but some of the outlet stores became offshoots that sold curtain and bath products. These stores held on until 2020, when it was announced that these stores too would close. In 1962, Woolworth decided to start a chain of discount stores they called Woolco. At the same time, S.S. Kresge was starting Kmart, which would blossom into one of the nation's largest retailers. Woolco, however, would struggle for most of their existence. The first Woolco store was located in Columbus, Ohio, and by 1966, they had 18 stores in the United States. The plan was to add 30 stores per year, so this led to tremendous growth as over 300 Woolco stores opened across the country by the mid-1970s. Cost-saving measures were enacted to keep the chain profitable, but eventually, Woolco stores would begin to close, with some being combined with existing Woolworth variety stores starting in 1983. When Woolco officially closed, 336 stores were shuttered, but stores located in Canada would last another decade before they were purchased by Walmart Canada. As for Woolworth, those famous stores would close for good in 1997. E.J. Corvettes was founded by two Navy buddies named Eugene Furkoff and Joe Zwillenberg in 1948. The name referenced their first names, and a small Navy ship called a Corvette. It preceded the Chevy Corvette, which debuted in 1953. The first store was located in Manhattan, and Corvettes expanded significantly during the 1950s, with many of their retail stores placed in strip malls that were next to high-traffic areas. Corvettes moved into Pennsylvania, Virginia, Michigan, and Missouri by the 1960s, and would peak with 58 stores before their decline. During the late 1960s, management decided to focus less on merchandise they knew well, like appliances, and shifted to clothing and home furnishings, which resulted in lower earnings. In 1979, stores began to close, and following a bankruptcy, EJ Corvettes closed for good in 1980. Berdines was a department store chain that operated in Florida with a flagship store located in downtown Miami. Dating back to 1897, William Berdine brought in his son to replace his old partner, and together they ran a dry goods store in Bartow, Florida. Berdine and Sons bought a block located along South Beach in Miami, and this was only a couple years after people began arriving in Miami following the construction of the railroad. Berdines was surprised by the success and closed his Bartow store and moved his entire operation to Miami. By 1911, Berdines was a full-fledged department store, and as the population of Florida soared, so did Berdines. Locations popped up across the state, and the chain was known as the Florida Store, with palm trees and shades of pink and blue gracing the buildings. During the 1950s, Berdines was purchased by Federated Department Stores, which owned Macy's. Although Berdines remained separately branded through 2004, it was eventually combined with Macy's. Berdines Macy's lasted only a year, and by 2005, the Berdines name was dropped altogether. Lord & Taylor is considered America's oldest department store, having been started in 1826 by Englishman Samuel Lord in New York City. In 1834, he partnered with George Taylor, and the Manhattan store was officially named Lord & Taylor. A second store opened in 1859, and from there they expanded across the city. In 1916, Associated Dry Goods bought the chain from the Lord family, and they turned the brand into a luxury store that would go on to open boutique-style locations around the Northeast. Much of the success was attributed to Dorothy Shaver, the first female executive who ran the company until 1959. During the 1970s, stores opened in other larger markets, but they aggressively pushed into Texas, Illinois, Michigan, and Florida. During the 1980s and 1990s, the May department store bought Lord & Taylor for their luxury department. By 2003, Lord & Taylor had lost its luster as it swelled to 86 locations. Their days were numbered, with new executive teams being brought in, some stores closed, and product lines were being updated. But they still failed to attract a younger demographic. In 2019, their landmark flagship store closed in Manhattan, and after almost 2 centuries, Lord & Taylor, which stood for luxury, closed all of its physical locations in 2021. Today, Lord & Taylor has been resurrected digitally as an online store. Two Guys was founded by Herbert and Sidney Hupschman of Harrison, New Jersey. The brothers got their start by selling scratched and dented TVs with a low markup. They opened their first Two Guys store in 1946 above an empty diner, and their business took off. Two Guys was enormously popular as a discount department store from the early 1960s until the early 1980s. You could buy everything from clothing, hardware, sporting goods, furniture, and even appliances at Two Guys. Some stores even sold groceries too. Two Guys continued to thrive for years. By the early 1980s, though, sales were declining, and the end was near. With 100 locations mostly in the East and Northeast, but also reaching as far as California, the company's real estate value exceeded their potential as a retail store. So by 1982, their parent company liquidated stores and became a real estate management company. Ames was founded in 1958 by brothers Milton and Irving Gilman in Southbridge, Massachusetts. The name of their store was taken from the name of the old tenant, the Ames Textile Company. Their discount store served a rural area where there were no other large competing stores around. This formula proved profitable, and the Ames Company was incorporated by 1962. Ames went on a buying spree and scooped up the Big N chain, King's department stores, and during the 1980s, they acquired the G.C. Murphy and Zayre chains. At its peak, they operated 700 stores in 20 states, making it the 4th largest discount retailer in the country at the time. With all of this buying, debt had become their biggest problem, and in 1990 they filed for bankruptcy. After emerging from bankruptcy, Ames continued to open new locations, and they even acquired Hill's department store in 1998. The following year was when stores began to close. By 2001, they were filing for bankruptcy again, and it was decided to wind down the business. The remaining 300 locations were all closed by 2002. Zodi's was a chain of discount department stores that were around from 1960 to 1986. The chain was operated by the Hartfield Zodi's Company, and they were mostly located in California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and Michigan. The first store opened June 13, 1960 in Garden Grove, California, and by 1969 there were 19 stores. In 1972 they acquired the Yankee Stores chain out of Flint, Michigan, and rebranded them as Zodi's. The Michigan stores proved to be unprofitable and were sold in 1974. That same year, the Hartfield Zodi's Company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and they later filed again in the early 1980s. By 1984, stores were closing at a rapid pace. The remaining Zodi's stores in California lasted until March of 1986, with many of the old locations being sold off to the Ralph's supermarket chain. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything. Also, don't forget to start building your family tree and researching your family history with MyHeritage. Sign up for a 14-day free trial using the link in the description. Thank you to our loyal Patreon supporters listed here. Visit patreon.com/recollectionroad to join the club. As always, thank you so much for watching.